Presentation is on a group of women in Indonesia called Tombois or lesbi. The closest equivalent to them in the United States would be lesbians. I'm going to start by showing a map of the area I'm talking about and explain how the culture affects their gender norms. And then I will discuss the differences between tomboys and their partners and other women. And I'll share with you my process and resources that I found, and then talk about some future avenues for research and leave time for comments and discussion at the end. The population I'll be focusing on is an island in Southeast Asia called West Sumatra. This is an Indonesian province. If you look in the middle of the screen, you can see a large yellow area that shows the Minangkabau group, which is the most common ethnic group in this area. It also shows the city Padang, which is where much of this research I read about was located. An important aspect of the Minangkabau are that they are the largest matrilineal society in the world. So part of the West Sumatra culture involves, in order for women to be considered citizens, they must be married and have children. They also must have a religion. Even though they don't have an official religion of the country, they are 90% Muslim. And so most of the morals they have are based on the adat, which is a set of customs and traditions that is based on Sharia law, which is based on the Quran. So whether or not the individuals or their families are religious, they definitely have their standards are conservative based. And these norms and values are reinforced through policy and media and family. The tomboys are also called lesbi, butchie, and cowick, are biologically female, but they identify as men. And they are known to have rejected their gender norms since childhood. They tend to be the dominant partner in the relationship and are considered gender deviant. They're only interested in feminine women, though. They support themselves like men would as jobs that are masculine, like laborers, parking attendants, or drivers, and sometimes they do feminine work like cooking. They wouldn't consider themselves to be in a same-sex relationship because their partners are always feminine. And an interesting aspect was that they tease each other in ways that reinforce masculinity, kind of like we learned about the high school kids in the book we read called Dude. The partners of tomboys are called Siwick and Femi. They are hyper feminine versions and typically submissive and work in domestic type roles, and then they do domestic tasks around the house. They aren't considered deviant because they are only interested in a masculine partner, and so only the tomboy is considered the deviant one. Now, my process in this, it was kind of a difficult thing. To begin with, I wasn't really sure what we were doing, and I kind of wanted to compare gender roles between men, women, and deviant genders to like any society. I don't know, it was just too broad. And with some help from our instructor who posted the study that you see there in the Indonesia discussion board, gave me a little bit narrower of a focus to compare the Minangkabau with other gender variants, like Bisu and Warrior are also from that area. However, that was still too broad, and so I finally was able to narrow it down to just the tomboys. Issue with this, though, is that there's limited sources about this. Usually you can just like go to YouTube and find videos, or you can hit the Google, find some personal stories, and I couldn't find anything like that. The news articles about the issues are about 5 years old, so that was kind have a problem. Some of the resources I found, this book, as you recognize from our class, was one of our textbooks, and chapter 6 had a section on the lesbi in our chapter about Indonesia, and I used that as a resource. Evelyn Blackwood is the leading authority on lesbians in West Sumatra. She is a lesbian anthropologist who focuses on gender, sexuality, and identity in Indonesia and the United States. She has written several books and a lot of articles, and every single source that I found about the Tomboys, they actually cited some part of her works. This book, Falling into the Lesbian World, I'd love to read the entire thing. One of the papers that I used as a source came from this larger work, and it is available through, I think, the UWS Interlibrary loan. However, there wasn't time for me to get it and read it for this project. And this is another book that Evelyn Blackwood has that I would love to read. She seems to be um, very interesting, and I would love to read more about her. She does have a website, and it lists all of her books and publications, and even says she has a book coming out in 24 or 25 about butch lesbians in, I think, the LA area in like maybe the 40s through the 70s, but definitely sounds interesting. So there was another resource that I found. It was a qualitative study of in Padang, that city I mentioned, of 5 lesbian couples. But 3 of those couples lived in the same house, which was kind of weird. That makes it a very small, peculiar study. It was problematic in the way it was written because it appeared to be by non-lesbians, and the views were kind of indicative of heteronormative lens. They used words like calling lesbianism a sexual disorder and talked about how this quote here, love is deeper and more intense than heterosexual love despite a lack of reasonable sexual satisfaction. And to me, I interpreted this as saying that sexual satisfaction was dependent upon a male. And that right there was problematic in my mind. And then this other quote was problematic in that they basically are saying that the population of lesbians is increasing, and it's because lesbians are basically trying to lure others onto their team. And it's really kind of silly, but it shows kind of a heteronormative and cisgendered view of what lesbianism is. So some future research about this would be, personally, I want to read those books by Blackwood and more of her work because, like I said, she's really interesting and she is well respected in the field of anthropology. There should be larger studies in West Sumatra. They should include private surveys instead of in-person interviews. I mentioned that group of 5 couples and how 3 of them lived in the same house. And you can imagine, they can't really be free to speak for one. And they all live in the same house. And so they're going to have the same or similar answers, I would think. But lesbianism is not accepted. And so they're not going to talk openly. And so there should be some other ways to gather data, and definitely on a larger scale. Um, they could have public information campaigns to change the view, and research could look at, what kind of campaigns are there. I know some of the news articles about 5 years ago were talking about the anti-LGBT campaigns, and so how have they affected the movement? And of course, new leaders in that area dictating different kind of values would be helpful, and research could look at the past because that's something also with this area is they had different eras and different views of lesbianism, but it's never generally been accepted. And so that ends my presentation, and we can have some comments or discussion. And I did include my list of sources here if anybody needs to check that out. And thank you for listening.